All right. I think I'm doing this right. So I think I remember to do yes, I pushed record this week. All right. So let's get started. Did you all read Philippians chapter 1?
Yes.
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 Good. Good. Anything jump out at you?
Oh, my note.
Hold on, my Bible's over here. My phone. So, our pastor this morning was preaching in Luke. He's preaching through Luke. And he was in a passage where it was about John the Baptist and how he's in prison. And then he sends a message to Jesus, asking for confirmation. Is Jesus, or like asking Jesus, hey, are you really the Messiah? Are you who we've been like waiting? Are you really the person that I've been telling everybody that you are? And it was kind of an interesting parallel because he's in the same situation really that Paul was in when he's writing the book of Philippians. But it was interesting how Paul's mindset is completely different than John the Baptist, even though John the Baptist is like a great person in the Bible and had a very important job. And it was
not only did he know Jesus, he was related to him.
Mm-hmm. So it was really interesting because like all throughout chapter 1, like just Paul's message that he's trying to convey to the Philippians about his circumstances, he has a lot, like it exudes a lot of confidence. Like he knows, like he's on the other end of what happened because he's, Jesus has already accomplished his purpose. And, he's on the other end of that, seeing the other side of things and comparing that to John the Baptist, who had not had that privilege of seeing that yet. That was a very interesting comparison about the difference in the mindset that made, like with a different knowledge base.
That's an interesting comparison, yeah. Last week we mentioned about marking all the instances of joy or rejoicing or rejoice. I've read through the book of Philippians multiple times and I thought I had them all marked, and I found one this week that I had missed. But kind of connecting to what Karen was talking about, I noticed twice in this first chapter that Paul used the word confidence or being confident. In verse 6, being confident of this very thing, that he which hath begun a good work in you will perform it until the day of Jesus Christ. And verse 25, and having this confidence, I know I shall abide and continue with you all for your furtherance and joy of faith. And then on a more humorous note, as I was looking at some different verses this afternoon, and I know I've had this thought before, makes me wonder if Paul was really from the southern part of the U.S., because he uses that phrase, you all, a number of times. So, once upon a time, I don't even remember how long ago it was, Susie's mom, Mrs. Cameron, had this Bible memory group. And she just had us, she would call us on the phone and send out, I can't remember if it was emails or text messages to have us memorize verses, but she wasn't just going verse by verse. She was going chapter by chapter through an entire book. And one of the books we did was the book of Philippians. So when you are trying to memorize something, you read it over and over and over and think about it, and you catch things that you'd never quite thought before. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And no, I do not remember everything we memorized, but I can remember the gist of a lot of it. Okay, so looking at the first chapter of Philippians, um, first in the first couple verses there, Paul just gives a basic greeting, and his letter is coming from, it says him and Timotheus, Paul and Timotheus, which is Timothy. Timothy might have been the one who actually delivered the letter. So that's their greeting. But then the first section of Paul's letter here, he talks about how thankful he is for that church there in Philippi and what he's praying about for them, or what he's praying concerning them. So what was he thankful for? In verse 3, it talks about every remembrance of them brings thanksgiving to his heart. And one of the key principles we'll get to, I think it's next week, has to do with that aspect. Thank my God upon every remembrance of you. And he's thankful, so he's thankful for them, the people there, and he's thankful for their fellowship and their connection through the gospel. You find that in verse 4. Nope, verse 5. And then what does he pray for them? This I found rather, I don't know, to me, I thought this was quite fascinating. In verses 9 through 11, we see that Paul prays that their love may abound yet more and more, their love for God and their love for each other. Secondly, that their knowledge and judgment, or wisdom and discernment, would grow, that they would increase in being wise and discerning. Verse 10, that ye may approve things that are excellent. And I've always thought that that concept was challenging, because so often we accept things that are good. Oh, this is okay. This is good. Instead of looking for what is more excellent. So that's a good challenge. Then he goes on to comment that they might be sincere and without offense. And I did a little bit of research about that word offense, and you could look at it several ways. First of all, that they would not offend God, that they would not offend others, or like Paul talks about elsewhere, like being a stumbling block to others, and also that they would not be easily offended themselves. And sometimes that's a challenge for us, because it's easy to be offended by something somebody says or does that just hits us the wrong way. And I think part of joy is learning to rise above those things that might offend us. And then he goes on in verse 11, talking about that they would be filled with the fruits of righteousness. Now, we all know the classic verse about the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians, but I think this is a little bit beyond that, that they would be filled with the fruit or the works or the deeds of righteousness, not in a legalistic matter, but because they were righteous, they would be living that out, that righteousness would be evident in everything they did, what they said, how they treated other people. And then in the next several verses, Paul's kind of explaining his current circumstances and his attitude about them. Starting in verse 12, he talks about he wanted them to understand that the things that happened to him, mainly his imprisonment, had a reason, had a good purpose, that God was in control. He says they have fallen out rather unto the furtherance of the gospel. So he's not blaming anybody for what happened to him. And then he's looking for God's reasons behind his circumstances. Verse, 14? Many of the brethren, waxing confident, I missed that confident, by my bonds, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. So his circumstances had given others boldness to speak about their relationship with Christ. And the second thing he lists about God's reasons for his circumstances is that Christ is preached to others. Now, he explains that some people are doing it kind of in a mocking way or in an insincere way. Some out of envy. But he said it doesn't matter because Christ's name is being preached. And then he expands on it in verse 20. He talks about that Christ is magnified or lifted up through his sufferings. Verse 20, he says, according to my earnest expectation and my hope, that in nothing I shall be ashamed, but that with all boldness, as always, so now also Christ shall be magnified in my body, whether it be by life or by death. So, despite his circumstances, Paul's desire is for Christ's name to be preached, for others to be saved, for Christ to be magnified. And then we see his dilemma. We start to see it in verse 20, the life versus death thing that he talks about in the next few verses. Verse 21, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. Verse 23, I'm in a strait between two. Having a desire to depart and be with Christ would be a great thing. But on the other hand, who's going to help these people who need to know Jesus, who need to learn about him? Who's going to help these churches as they're struggling or beginning? So he's like, which one should I choose? Obviously, the desire to leave this world and be with Christ was a strong consideration, but also his desire to stay in the world and to help others. So, verse 25 tells us his final decision. And having this confidence, I know that I shall abide and continue with you all for your furtherance and joy of faith. Now, he wasn't making this decision on his own, and it wasn't like, oh, I can just give up and quit and go be with Christ, or I can endure the trials here and help people. That wasn't his thinking at all. He was confident through the leading of the Holy Spirit. He was confident that he was making the right choice, making the choice that God wanted for him to stay on this earth and to work with believers and unbelievers. And he was looking to increase their joy and their rejoicing, not his own. So he had a very selfless attitude in all this. And then to finish out the chapter, he gives a challenge to his friends and fellow believers there in Philippi. First of all, to live right, to live according to God's way. Only let your conversation be as it becometh the gospel of Christ. Let your way of life, your speech, and your actions uphold and uplift the gospel of Christ, not to detract from it. And then he goes on in that same verse, in verse 27, that whether I come and see you or else be absent, I may hear of your affairs, that ye stand fast in one spirit, with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel. He says, be steadfast. Keep going. Don't be wishy-washy. Paul gives that same instruction in the end of 1 Corinthians 15 in verse 58. He says, therefore, my beloved brethren, be ye steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. Be firm in your faith. I was trying to look up, I have an app, and today I put it on my computer too, that I often use for Bible reading and Bible study. And it has a search feature where you can type in even just a word and it'll search. And so I typed in steadfast, STEADFAST, and it kept coming up with nothing. I'm like, oh, wait, because they spell it differently. It's STED. Okay, so he encourages them to stand fast, and then finally, to not be terrified of their adversaries. Verse 28, and in nothing terrified by your adversaries. And it seems like he's saying, if you're afraid of them, if they see your fear, they'll use that to your disadvantage, which is to them an evident token of your perdition. If they think you're afraid, it's because they know you're wrong. So, we will have adversaries. May not be like in the days of Paul, but we will have adversaries, and we will suffer in one way or another for Christ's sake. Paul uses that several times. I didn't look this up earlier because I didn't think of it, but several times he kind of gives that indication that we will suffer, and it's only fitting because Jesus suffered so much for us that if we align ourselves with Jesus, then we'll have to endure some of the same suffering. So that kind of is like an overview of that first chapter of Philippians. Now, I'm curious, did any of you get the copy of the book? 1, 2. I know Vicky got it.
Mine's being shipped.
Yours is coming then. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So the reading assignment for today is kind of another introduction, but it's a deeper introduction. We're actually looking at, it's kind of the prologue to the first 5 principles from chapter 1. So, one of the things that the author pointed out is that often our joy is held hostage by our circumstances. And we mentioned this a little bit last week about our circumstances can defeat us. So, our joy is held hostage often by our circumstances, and the way we look at our circumstances often affects our levels of joy. Now, there are things in our life that we can control that will help us increase our ability to have joy despite our circumstances. So, our personal habits, getting enough sleep, eating right, activity, the people we hang out with, our friendships, are things we can control. Keeping our promises, making wise and right decisions. Those kinds of things we can control. But then there are the things we cannot control, like the weather, the actions and attitudes of other people, our personal genetic makeup, the world economy, attacks by others. We can't control those things. There's an frequently used phrase about you cannot control other people's actions, but you can control your reactions. And I think that's kind of the point he's making here. And even the great wise King Solomon recognized this. In Ecclesiastes 9, he said, I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill, but time and chance happeneth to them all. Reading through the book of Ecclesiastes, you often don't get a sense of joy. There are some great verses in there, but overall, it almost seems like what's fatalistic.
There's no sense of closure. It's just like, okay, well, is it good or is it bad? But then it's like, or does it even matter?
Right. Time and chance happeneth to them all. Now, when we're faced with situations or circumstances out of our control, what is our usual reaction? Or what can be often our usual reaction?
I mean, it depends on the person, obviously, but
Right.
panic, anxiety, worry.
Yeah.
Anger.
And a lot of that is rooted in fear. We're afraid of situations we can't control, of events we can't control. And that's kind of a natural response. It's kind of built into us. The author used the example of a group of friends being out in the woods and being chased by a bear. Your first instinct is to run. And then he joked about you don't have to be the fastest, you just don't want to be the slowest. So our fear response can be the greatest enemy of our happiness or our joy. But along with that innate fear response, we also have the ability to override that response. We need to learn to rise above our circumstances and live in a continued state of joy. We cannot let our circumstances define us or depress us or control us. We have to rise above them. So that leads us to ask ourselves, where is your joy and happiness based? What is its foundation? Is your joy based on what's happening in life, or who you're with, or what the next thrill is going to be? Or should our joy have a deeper foundation? As a believer, our happiness, our hope, our joy should all be founded or based on realities unaffected by the conditions of this world. And the Apostle Paul knew that. In 2 Corinthians 11, I'm not going to read all the verses, but he describes what his life has been like since he became a believer, since he accepted Christ as his Lord and Savior on that road to Damascus. He talks about his beatings, his imprisonment, his being cast out of places. But in spite of all that, he learned contentment and joy. He wasn't allowing his circumstances to dominate his attitude. Philippians 4 verse 12, Paul says, I know both how to be abased and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I am instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. And it's basically, it didn't, either way, he was okay with. It didn't affect his joy. His foundation for his joy wasn't based on his circumstances. In 2 Corinthians 7, verse 4, Paul says, "Great is my boldness of speech toward you. Great is my glorying of you. I am filled with comfort. I am exceeding joyful in all our tribulation." He wasn't just joyful, he was exceeding joyful. And in Acts 13, verses 51 and 52, "But they shook off the dust of their feet against them, and came unto Iconium, and the disciples were filled with joy and with the Holy Ghost." They had to leave whatever city they were in, I can't remember what it was, because of the people's attitudes against them and potential strikes against them. So they left the city, they got out of the city, shook off all the dust from the city, and went on full of joy. I found, as Bible scholar wrote this about Paul and his joy, I found several good things in that quotation. Joy is a settled state of mind characterized by peace, an attitude that views life with equanimity, meaning often our lives are ups and downs and our moods go with them, but according to this, joy keeps us level. We're not affected as much by all the things, all the ups and downs of life. Joy is also a confident way of looking at life, rooted in faith in a living God. There's that idea of confidence again. But our confidence is not in ourselves or our abilities or our greatness. No, our confidence is rooted in God. And then he went on to say that joy is the ability to see beyond any particular event to the sovereign God who is above all events. When we look at all the circumstances that surround us on any given day or any period of time, we need to learn to look beyond them to the God who is in control of all of them. When you look at people in the Bible who have had bad things happen to them, Paul being one, Job, and there was another example that came to mind and I forgot it as soon as it came to my mind. God was orchestrating all those things behind the scenes. Now, we read that God doesn't do bad things to us, ever, but sometimes he allows bad things to happen to us, but always for a reason. And the sovereign God, the God who knows what's going on, and the God who knows all the things from every angle behind the scenes, is above and beyond all those circumstances. There was a little equation in the reading that struck me. Life is 10% events and 90% are actions and reactions and responses to them. And when we think about it, isn't that kind of true? Yes, an event happens, but how do we react to it? How do we respond to it? And that's what affects our attitudes and our joy. At the end of the reading for today, the author gave 2 examples of joy. I hope you read these. Viktor Frankl, a Jewish man who survived the atrocities of the concentration camps of World War II, talked about losing everything, about having everything taken away from them. But there were some men in their concentration camp who went around caring for others. He said the last of the human freedoms they could not take away from us was the ability to choose one's attitude in any set of circumstances. So no matter what's happening to us or around us, we still have the ability to choose our attitude. And then the other person he quoted was Jennifer Rothschild, who I don't know if you've heard of her or not. I had to look her up to find out who she was. She went blind at the age of 15 due to some kind of disease. She said, "It is not well with my circumstances all the time, but it is forever well with my soul." And that's true. Our circumstances are not always going to be what we want them to be. Often they will not be what we want them to be. But our relationship with Christ tells us that it is forever well with our soul. Sometimes you'll hear people talking about all their grievances, all their woes and troubles, but life is not meant to be keeping score of who suffers more or who has more trying circumstances. Paul did not do that. His statements were made more for awareness and warning and realism. He was not bragging about all the troubles he had to kind of gain points or favor. Instead, we should focus on who has experienced the most joy despite or because of suffering and difficulties. Always looking to rise above the circumstances and focus on joy. So, questions or comments?
On everything or just this particular?
What?
On everything? Questions or comments on what?
Yes, everything we discussed or anything. Not life in general.
Going back to the very beginning, I'm sure that, well, I don't know if it's intentional or not. And you may have talked about it last week. Is Paul pulling from Joseph when he talks about how God is using this situation for, like, what verse is it?
Oh, I know what you're referring to. You meant it for...
You meant, like...
You meant it for trouble or something, but God meant it for good.
Verse 12, I think. I think it's verse 12. That area. But is that intentional? I would assume it is, because the Bible seems to do that.
Um, I don't know that he was intentionally referencing Joseph's comments in, I can't
It's
think
like
of,
Genesis 50 or something when he's talking to his brothers.
yeah, right at the end.
Hmm.
But it's definitely the same
It's a very
concept.
strong parallel.
Yes.
No. The other thing I thought it was cool, because it talks about he's telling the church to have unity in faith. Our pastor's going through Ephesians right now, and he did a whole sermon, I don't remember when, a couple weeks ago, all about unity. It was kind of cool to see the same topics being addressed
Yes.
in
You
both of
find
these
that in a
ways.
lot of
Yeah.
Paul's writing. The same general topics kind of reappear. So, which can be encouraging
It's
because it
also
tells us that,
discouraging.
okay, all these different places and we're having the same
Same
issues.
problem.
So, yes, that can be discouraging, but at the same time, we can think, oh, it's not just me.
Yeah.
Let's see. Last week we talked briefly about the word that Paul used for joy. Um, and Karen, I think, asked if it was the same root as characteristic. And from the little bit of research I did, it was not, even though the word for joy comes from kara, the Greek word kara.
Is that where Karen comes from?
What?
Is that where Karen comes from?
Have no idea.
No, I don't believe so.
Would have been cool.
Actually, Karen is the first part of a name of one of Job's daughters at the end of the book, if I recall correctly.
Karen Huppich, I think.
Something like that. And that was long before Greek, so. All right. So, I will post the assignments in the group chat. The first two are based on what the author says at the end of this section of reading about reflecting on your circumstances and reflecting on your current level of joy. Keep reading Philippians 1. Keep memorizing or reviewing verse 21 of Philippians 1. And if you have the book, read and study pages 9 through 16. So next week we'll look at the first principle that Paul gives us relating to living in joy despite our circumstances. And I remembered to push record, so I'll post the recording for anybody who needs it, and I can also post the notes if anybody wants that.
Sounds good.
Okay, any other questions or comments?
I don't have the book, so is it like smaller? I was thinking it was like smaller, like bigger chunks, but it seems to be like a overview of chapter 1 and then going back into smaller chunks of it. Does that sound right?
Right, and the author didn't give all that overview of chapter 1. That was me.
Oh yeah, no, but is it like broken into smaller pieces, like
Yes,
so
so
it's not?
like
Oh,
each principle he gives comes from like a section of, like the first 5 principles are all in chapter 1.
okay, okay, okay.
So each principle will be based on a few verses, or maybe even one verse in the chapter.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay? All right.
Oh, boy.
Then before we run out of time, we should say goodbye. And I'll see you all next week, I hope.
Alrighty.
All right.
Hope
Farewell.
everybody
Have
has
a
a
great
good
week.
Bye.
It's all starting
Bye.
school tomorrow.
Yay for school. Bye.
Bye.